Hey, Soraya, how's it going?
Hey Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Do you remember way back when, to last week, when we interviewed Paul B. Cutler,
Yes,
who was a musician and a producer, right?
correct.
And I had a little stack of records, quite a big stack of things that he
Yes.
worked on. Well, likewise, today we're talking to a musician. I got a little stack too, to a musician and producer again, aren't we?
Yes. And for our listeners today, look, Jeff and I right now we're on a 2 for 2 streak of going into our unicorn list. But Jeff, let's see if our listeners can find the common link between these items, these bands,
Okay.
artists. Okay.
Okay.
With me?
Yep.
The Quick,
Yes.
Sparks,
Okay.
2020,
Okay.
Jupiter Affect,
Hmm.
and Helen Reddy.
Wait a minute. You just threw a curveball in there.
No, I did not. These are all connected. I mean, these are only 5 of a bajillion more.
Yeah. 500 plus.
Exactly, of artists that have recorded with and been produced by the great Earle Mankey.
Yes. Yes.
Solo artist in and of his own right.
Yeah. That too. That too.
But yeah, and if anyone disbelieves it, all you have to do is do your own little research on a little site Jeff and I love to call Discogs.
Indeed.
And
Yeah.
you'll see all these things. But also, I mean, besides the great honor of having Earle Mankey on the show today, we're also going to be joined by our very beloved guest host, Ronnie Barnett.
Yes.
Yeah.
We love
So
that guy.
amazing. And as far as I know, the Muffs never produced or engineered by Earle Mankey.
I think that's true. I think that's
And
true.
that's surprising because Earle Mankey has a very long list of artists that he's worked with. So
Yeah, and a lot of this time, or a lot of those recordings, most, if not all, were done in the kitchen or in his house. So, yeah, I want to know about this psychedelic shack. So,
Earl Psychedelic Shack, I mean, it has produced some amazing albums and great sounds.
indeed,
And I'm really looking forward to this. So
yeah.
let's get started. Hi, this is Soraya.
And this is Jeff,
Our podcast is called Paisley Stage Raspberry and Rhyme.
a podcast where the two of us play music that we like and share anecdotes and background about the tunes.
We hope you'll join our conversation. And without further ado, a gruviar.
Let's get groovy.
All right, so for our listeners today, first of all, we want to welcome our guest host extraordinaire, Ronnie Barnett.
Yay.
Hey, y'all.
But the unicorn of all unicorns, Jeff, for us, the great producer, musician, engineer, I mean, solo artist, we can go on and on and on. The great Earle Mankey. Thank you and welcome.
Yay for me.
For us too. Whew.
So we got a lot of questions. Last week we interviewed Paul B. Cutler, who is a musician and producer, guitar player who's played with Dream Syndicate and produced a large stack of records that I own in my record collection over here. Likewise, I have a stack of records that you worked on, Earl, and the Discogs page that we go to, that we do some of our research on, has a lot of records that you've worked on. But of course, the 3 o'clock, Jupiter Effect, Permanent Green.
Songwriters.
Yes, so many that we talk about a lot on our podcast have a direct impact to you. So we wanted to thank you for coming on, and welcome to the show, Earl.
Great. Well, I've heard just about all of those shows, especially the Paisley Underground types. And I'm a little on the shy side that way. So I just enjoyed listening to them. But I knew that everything that they were remembering, that I had already forgotten. so that's where I'm a little insecure about coming up with the fan info.
It's a lot to remember, Earl. You've done a lot, so we'll get to that, and we're going to talk about Helen Reddy too.
Yes.
But we won't start with that. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I figured that the place that we could start at would be with this little band here, Sparks.
Cool. I like those guys.
Yeah. This guy who kind of looks like Rudy Sarzo, I would say, is actually Earle Mankey, our original guitar player.
With a spider on his neck. He lives.
Yes, I want to talk about what you're wearing there, Earl. Is that a net shirt? Like, I always thought it was like a net.
Yeah, it's a net shirt. I think my wife may have come up with that because it's not a man. It's not a very manly shirt, but it was glam.
Do you still have it? Do you still have that and the spider?
No, I don't have any of that stuff. There was a guy when I worked for the Beach Boys. There was a guy there that wanted to borrow it for his wife, and he borrowed it, and then he never gave it back to me. This was the velvet one, which is on the other ones, and finally, I asked him one day, "Are you ever going to give me that back?" He goes, "What? You wouldn't wear that, would you?" And I said, "Well, no." And so that was the last. I've never heard of it since then.
I can see why he would want his wife to wear that net shirt. So Half Nelson was how the band started out, Sparks. Do you recall the early days of the Sparks and getting that going and how that
yeah. I mean, it's kind of the standard story, but I had been in bands before that, a number of bands actually, and I was going to UCLA, and I went to the music building to see if I could find a band there to join, and they had a posting on the bulletin board, so I followed it up, and I met Ron and Russ, and we spent probably a couple of years recording, because I was a recording guy at that point. I had a 2-track tape recorder, actually a quarter track they call it. And I'd been recording myself, and I said, well, let's just record the band. And so we spent 2 years recording demos and such in order to get a record deal, which we actually did. So
wow. So you took those demos and did you send those to different labels?
Well, I'm pretty much a musician in a band. That's in my own head, that's what I am. And I met these guys, and they were from the art department and the film department, and they knew all of this stuff, like when you go to a hangout of record company people and they talk about all of this, how the system works and how cool that guy was and what he was wearing and who he knew. And I don't know any of that. None of that. Well, they know all that though. I think I won't say they knew it, but they knew that was their world. They'd been in the art department and such, and they knew how the hierarchy of getting signed and everything was. So the thing that sticks in my head is when we finally got the package, the tape recorded a certain number of songs, they made up a package. Like there's a name for this, but a thing that you take around and hand to the label, and it was a big box, and it was full of videos and postcards and pieces of art and little, I don't know, that art things, It was really a big deal, and so they would hand that to the A&R guy at the label. And he'd never seen anything like that, It's I have to show with my hands. He'd never seen anything like that, It's a big package, And so it got their attention right off the bat. And then we would get a meeting with the A&R guys, and we'd go up to the office at the label, whatever the label happened to be, and they would always be surprised because we weren't like any other bands. I mean, that was just the bottom line. There was nobody in town like us, maybe in any town. And so we caught their attention, and we got lots of nibbles from a lot of companies, and we were even signed to Capitol Records for about 10 minutes, and then that fell apart. And then we finally got our deal with Warner Brothers Bearsville, and I owe it to them and their gung ho, attitude, their artistic attitude. Again, I'm a guy who plays guitar in a band and records things, and I will say, I'm kind of doing a sidetrack, but I guess that's my job. So they were real art guys. and I wasn't, but it was a period. This was the late 60s, maybe even early 70s, when if you were in a band or you were the Beatles, let's say, you always tried to break new ground, to do something that no one had ever done, and to shock people, and to, do something new. And every other band, I'm exaggerating, most other bands, there's a checklist. I'm gonna include punk in this. There's a way for hardcore punk to just be hardcore punk. You don't stray from that, and if you do it right and you get a lot of fans, you're a star. But otherwise, you never get noticed. Well, we weren't that kind of band. We were trying to do something different, and that was like the formation of my art. If for the first time I ever thought of it as art, probably. But I've always thought that trying to be different, trying to do something that people hadn't done, and trying to do it really in a way that I had never done, a really difficult way to do something that most people consider easily done. Um, that's kind of my thing, and it has turned out to be just the absolute wrong thing to do if you're ever trying to be rich and famous. But it was a lot of fun. So that's my story. That's probably
Were you guys playing live before the record much, Earl, or was it mainly
Oh,
a
you mean
studio?
back in those days or what?
No, I mean the early Half Nelson. Like, did Half
Oh,
Nelson? Were you playing much live, or is
no,
it mainly
we
studio?
played a few. We got a manager at the time that we were also looking for labels. There was a manager that got us actually Mike Burns. I should mention him. He did way more than just be our manager for the labels. He paid for an entire demo album. And he was a big fan of Sparks, and he got us a few gigs too, they weren't famous gigs. In fact, it was a little embarrassing being Sparks and playing in the same venues that everyone else played in. It's I don't know, what was it? One of them, this wasn't at that point, but that we played a gig, a famous gig in Houston with some sweaty, hard, heavy metal band. I can't remember their name, but we were. Russell was doing his posing on the stage, and all the audience were like Texans, and it didn't go over very well. And that was the one where Russell hit his head with the sledgehammer and
yes.
had to go to the hospital. So I remember that. But then we played in Hollywood with a well-known, that I've forgotten the name of him, a piano player that is sort of a singer-songwriter piano player at a pretty nice venue down in Hollywood, but the audience was not our audience. So we were uncomfortable there. I can't honestly remember too many more live venues before we got signed. But that one was an interesting one too, because we knew we were small time, but we wanted to be big time. So we all got jumpsuit, not jumpsuits, that's probably not the right name, but when your mechanic works on a car and he wears coveralls. Well,
yes.
We all got coveralls, and we all came out on the stage to set up our amps and stuff, because we didn't want people to think we didn't have roadies. And so we were the roadies. And then we went and we changed our clothes and we came out looking ridiculous.
Oh my gosh, that's
No one
hilarious.
recognized us, I'm sure.
That's hilarious. So Earl, it's talking about live shows. Did Queen ever open up for you guys for
Oh
Sparks?
yeah, a famous story at the what's it? Marquee Club in London. Yeah, but we were on a label. Oh, I have a Queen story before that led me up to it. The black velvet coat that's on one of the album covers. I bought that at Kensington Market in Kensington, of course, in London, and I wandered through the market and found this coat. Yeah, well, that's a green velvet, but there's a black velvet somewhere as well.
Okay.
And so I went up and went to buy the coat, and there were two guys in the booth, and they pushed and pulled and told me how great I looked, and it turned out to be the drummer and the singer from Queen, and it was their booth. And so they told me about how they were recording an album at the well-known studio that I've forgotten the name of, and they invited us there to visit. And we never did visit, but they invited us. And then a few weeks later, we played with them at the Marquee Club, but because we had a record deal and they didn't yet, I assume they didn't have one yet, we were top bill. and we got to see, there's a green room at the Marquee Club. It's about twice the size of a closet. And we were all in the closet and we were all getting undressed, and I got to see the underwear that Queen wore.
Whoa.
Polka dots
Whoa.
and you know, and little horses and stuff on their underwear. So
Wow.
that's the way
Incredible. Yeah.
So I
I
learned
love
a lot of the inside stories.
I love that you blew them off, Earl. You blew off that invitation to go to the studio.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it had more to do with scheduling. We didn't dislike them, and then
Right.
we actually ended up visiting the studio later. But it was after they, I mean, they weren't in that night. Let's put it that way. We just visited the studio.
Did you guys joke about the underwear, or were you like,
Oh,
I
I
actually
just
like
tried to
this?
tell that
Yeah,
story.
All right, jumping ahead, how does the original band break up? How does it implode after the second
well,
album
we
there?
can't, you know, things were pretty cool. Lines around the block at the Marquee Club when we got an opportunity to go to Zermatt to ski over Christmas vacation. And so we took it. And so that meant that we weren't at the Marquee Club that night. And we heard that we heard this, I hope it's true, that there were people out there yelling, you know, sparks, 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 because we weren't there. But we did have long lines. I'm not sure exactly why, but at that point we were getting some popularity in London, and so that was a good story, I guess. So you say what happened? So that was get your adrenaline going, right? If you're in that state. Well, then we went back to LA, and then we played the Whiskey about another 12 times, and nobody in LA cared or knew or had any interest in Sparks, and the band sort of, and personally, I had graduated, and I think probably Russell had graduated by then too from UCLA. And so it was time to get a job, and I got a job building the Beach Boys console, which turned out to be lucky for me. And Ron and Russ, with nothing happening, said, we're going back to England. And they went back to England, and you know, they did their magic, and they found a band and a producer and all, and they made, I hate to admit it, probably the best record they ever made. So I mean, I'm a guitar guy, and to me that I guess it'd be the third album. That album of theirs in England was a guitar album, and I thought it was really great. That's the kind of band I wanted to be. And so then, you know, then they went off into more keyboard stuff, and I have to admit, I kind of drifted away, and my interest was the more keyboardy they got. But that was why they took off for England, and it was great for them. And we seem to be on good terms, if that's an issue. They came back, and we did a little recording with them, or I did a little recording with them, and we visited at their show when they were there, and we visited at their house, and we had a pretty good, you know, get together for a while. But then we kind of lost touch over the years. So.
Now, did you want to pursue playing music more after that, or did you just kind of fall into the studio side of things? And
definitely the studio side. Let's see, when I always recorded myself at home, always. And then when I started working for the Beach Boys, I was able to use the equipment to be you know, to really record myself. I didn't have to do it on quarter tracks at home or anything like that. I had a 4-track at home, by the way, at that point. But the Beach Boys had a 16 and then a 24-track at that time. And so I started recording my own stuff, my own songs. And still no band, but as I said, I've got to make some money at this deal, or I'm going to fall apart. So, you know, I really wanted to be a producer, making records and recording. That was probably even above a band. That was more what I liked doing, was just recording music. And so let's see. Oh, I don't know. So I know. Then came the Runaways. And I was a big fan of girl groups in the 60s, because I'm a 60s guy. There's no getting around it. And I thought, oh, right, the Runaways, here's a girl group and they're playing guitars. What could be better than this? So I called Kim Fowley and asked him if I could produce them. And he basically laughed in my face. But that was Kim Fowley. That's probably, you know, people say weird things about Kim Fowley, but that was my first real connection to the music industry, and he was the guy. I mean, he called me up after, a few months after I'd asked about the Runaways, and said, "Did you want to produce the Quick?" I'm sure largely because the Quick were big Sparks fans too. Yeah,
Yeah.
that album. And so I said, heck yeah, and did the Quick album. And I, at that point, I had a more serious route into being a producer. And so that was really where my focus became at that time. And then because of that, things rolled on, and I was able to do more of my own recording. And two of the guys in the Quick and my brother, Jim from Sparks, we formed a band. And so that was my only band thing between Sparks and the rest of my life. And we practiced for a few months, and I wasn't I wasn't the right guy for them. Danny Wilde was my favorite singer, which is from the Quick, and so that's why I wanted to have this band. And I discovered that with my production stuff and my engineering and the band, that honestly, those guys were better at being in a band than I was, and I dropped out. And then as a result, probably, I can't speak for Jim, but then Jim dropped out, and then they went on to do an album without us, or at least to finish the album that we had started. Let's put it that way. And that band was Cigarettes at the time that I was in it, that I remember. And that was my only band. So when that fell apart, then that was the last time I ever did any band stuff.
Gotcha. Cigarettes. I've never heard of that.
You may never hear of them again. But it was Danny Wilde and I'm so bad at names. The bass player from the Quick, and my brother and me. And,
Yeah.
So wow. And a drummer that I've also forgotten.
Well, knowing you probably recorded. This would be a great archival release.
I think we started, some of the recordings were by way of me, but then the final deal was, I lost touch after that, so I don't know where it went, but I know there's an album now with that name on it.
Yeah, gotcha. I think Ian was the bass player, right, from the Quick?
Ian, yes, that's right. A very, very, very good bass player. You'd be proud to have him in your band. He was very much like, we sounded like the Who when he was playing bass. He was very good.
Nice. Well, going back to you building the Beach Boys studio, Earl, how did you meet the Beach Boys? How'd you fall into that?
Well, that was pretty accidental, but being a UCLA guy, I went to the bulletin board again, and there was on the bulletin board, it said, electronic engineer wanted to build recording console. I mean, it wasn't literally build it. There was another guy with a physics major who had built it up to a certain stage, and he needed help apparently, or at least he hired me. And so he and I did the last stages of this console, which okay, there's a story behind the console if that matters. The Beach Boys had actually used the console in Holland for their Holland album, and it fell on the tarmac when they were taking it off the airplane. I don't know if it bounced, but consoles weigh a lot, and it wasn't good.
Yeah.
So the first thing to do was to get that console working. And then we expanded it into being a quad console, a thing of the past, but there was quad back in those days. And at a certain point, the original guy, I can't remember his name, but he was a great guy. Let me say that.
Yeah.
But anyway, he said, enough of this. Here's Earl. He knows everything about this console. He said it to the Beach Boys because they were the ones who paid for it. Here's Earl. You can have the console, and you can have Earl. Don't ever call me again.
Wow.
and so I was there, I don't know, a number of months, probably 3 months or more, just getting the thing set up and working. And they were building a studio around it too. So there was a lot of stuff to be done. And then finished that, and it got it working. And at that point, I was able to do my first recording session, which was Elton John, Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me, with the Beach Boys singing background, and a wonderful song, a wonderful background, and a good thing for my credits. So it just kind of went from there. That being at the Beach Boys studio was good for me because all I had to do was say, you know, I'm working here, come and record with me, and then all the bands would like to work with me. So that was good.
So I imagine that working with the Beach Boys, that led to working on Dennis Wilson's Pacific Ocean Blues album.
Yeah. In fact, probably at least half of my time at the studio was spent on Dennis because Dennis and Carl came in regularly. Brian came in once in a blue moon, and everybody, you know, fawned over him, and all the session musicians came in. It was a big deal when Brian came, but Dennis and Carl were there all the time, and Dennis was there even more than Carl. And Carl would often come in the afternoon, and then he'd go home, and Dennis would come in, and Dennis had worked till 2 or 3 in the morning. And so that would be me. Nobody else wanted to work with Dennis till 2 or 3 in the morning. And so we spent a lot of time, especially on the songs that went onto that album. And with all of those guys, I was able to kind of polish my chops. You know, the hours would go by while they're working out parts and repeating parts and maybe fixing parts and trying to get one part right. And I would have the whole studio there to myself to just do whatever I want. So they were kind of my experiment. And sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't work, but it was fun. Got to be adventurous at the Beach Boys studio.
Speaking
so
of
you asked
that,
about Dennis. So yeah, so a lot of Dennis, and then about so that Pacific Ocean Blue was actually released in its entirety while I was still there. It's weird about Beach Boy albums, you know, they'll record a few songs and then they'll take something from the distant past and put it on the album, and maybe even something that was for a different project. And each album, as you go through time, and this has been that way forever, is things that just were on the shelf that got put into this album. And so things that I did, because I was there for 4.5 years or something like that, and maybe 5, and things that I did would not show up until, you know, 10 years after I'd left the studio, you know. And some projects that were weird projects by the other members would get mixed into things by the Beach Boys and so on. And so I have a period that I worked there, and my name is certainly on anything that I worked there for. And then succeeding albums after that my name might be on it. I hope that it would be. And then some things, though, on the albums that I worked with were done, you know, late 60s or something like that, and they'd go onto the album. So anyway.
No. After that Dennis record, we got to talk about Beach Boys "Love You," which is a fan favorite, and it's an incredible record, and it's not the usual.
Not the usual. That's the beauty of
it. Yes. Essentially, was that a Brian solo record to start with?
Without a doubt, yeah. I mean, of course, the story, which is true, is that he was you know, had Landy was his psychiatrist, and Landy set up a schedule for him. You have to go here at, and I'm going to say 10 o'clock in the morning, because that's probably what it would usually be. And you have to work until, I'm going to say 2 o'clock. And all you have to do is write and play, you know. And so, you know, and here's the interesting part. If you do a good job, you'll get to smoke a joint at the end of it. And
wow.
so that was
reward. Yes.
So that was an encouragement for Brian. But the beauty of it for me was I often got to talk with Brian. You know, he'd be out there pounding away on his piano. And I was a big fan of all of the Phil Spector productions up to that time. And so was Brian. So we got to talk a lot about what he got from Phil Spector and what Phil Spector did, and why, you know, what Brian thought about the music and such, and how he constructed, how he arranged the pieces and so on. And it was educational for me and a lot of fun too. Or you could catch him on a different day, and you, especially if you were too aggressive going up to Brian, you know, to say, "Hey, Brian," Brian would back away, and he'd back away, and he'd back away until he'd get over. I'm remembering one case where he went in the reception room we had, and he shut the door, and I couldn't talk to him anymore. Apparently, I scared him.
I envision those sessions went on for a long time, like that, like it was spread out. I would imagine, or was it conceived as a record? Yeah.
Yeah, those Lendy things, they were spread out and in little bits. The Love You definitely took a long time, but the other Brian projects like 15 Big Ones, I'm thinking of especially, that was like somebody said Brian was going to come into the studio tonight. Uh, Trisha, the secretary, called all of his friends who were studio musicians, and the room was packed with studio musicians. And Brian came in and was, oh my gosh, and he'd say to the guys, okay, we're going to BS our way through this one, and blam 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 blam, and my story that I love to tell is that one of the songs, like now I can't remember the song, but they often had two basses, a stand-up bass and an electric bass, and during this run through, the bass guys, you could hear on the tracks, they were working out the parts and saying, this is, there's a G note here and so on. And they were working it out through the song, testing each other and so on. And then the song was over and Brian said, that's great, guys. That's a take. And so that went on the album. those guys working out their bass parts during the song.
Wow. First
So
run
they were quick sessions. And then the comment about we'll BS our way through this. That was Sid Sharp, the string guys, the string leader. He was a leader of the sessions for Brian's string sessions, and so they're putting strings on some of the songs, and Brian would just go out and talk to Sid and say, let's do this, this, and this. And that was his first comment. Listen, we're going to BS our way through this because there's no score or anything for the string section to read. And he'd tell him what he wanted, and Sid would tell the string section what to do, and they would play the strings, and it would work. I got the feeling that wasn't the first time they'd ever done that before. That seems to be one of the ways that Brian would work with strings. That was fun time.
Jeff?
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many records that I wanted to bring up that you've worked on, Earle. But I did want to talk a little bit more about these records, your own records.
Oh, yeah.
You've released a few of your own records under your own name.
I think you're holding them in your hand right now.
Yeah.
About it.
Indeed, yeah. So can you talk about putting these out versus being in a band or and doing production work?
Yeah, I never really never been a music industry guy, so putting them out is a whole separate thing for me. I mean, recording them was big, fun, exciting. I loved doing it, especially Mau Mau is kind of the first big deal that I tried to do. And there was a song, Ain't Gonna Step on You Again. I think that's the title, by the guy that produced Elton John. He was the engineer for it, and I just loved that. It was like 1,000 instruments marching, screaming, pounding, and it was an English release, and so I assume it made it to the English charts, but I liked it. Anyway, when I was working with Elton John later on, the engineer told me, yeah, I had to become a producer because I was such a terrible engineer, but because I had pointed out that song to him and he was embarrassed by it, but it was a formative record for me. So what were we talking about?
So your solo
my stuff, yeah. So that Mau Mau was the first thing that I was able to do after the Beach Boys studio was rolling. And so I was able to have all these tracks, whereas before it was always sound on sound on sound on sound on sound, and lots of hits. But that was a real record. And so I got my wife to sing on it. I got the secretary of the studio, Trisha, to sing on it, and I got let's see, who else was cool. Oh, my brother Jim played bass, and I did just about everything else. Probably there must be something on. Oh yeah, and Jan Uvena. For some reason, I remember his name, Uvena, Jan. He was the drummer on that, and that, by the way, that's kind of that was always my method of laying something down. If I could get a rhythm to follow, because I'm really strict as a producer about not everybody has to play the same thing, and not, a band has to listen to each other when they play. That's my rule. And so I didn't have a band, and I was kind of breaking new ground as being just a solo guy on a multi-track. The other people had done it, but this is pretty far back there. And so Jan would play the song, and I didn't know what the song was. And then I'd go up and I'd go back and I'd make a song to it. Turned out to be Mau Mau. And then afterwards, if there are some drum overdubs too, especially in the outro, that he overdubbed to that. And so that was just all of these people on a 24 track for the first time. And it was all 24 tracks and then lots of bouncing. So I'm going to take a wild guess and say 50 to 70 tracks probably to do that.
Wow.
It's not, but this is again my production rule. It's not necessarily a big mess with 50 to 70 tracks if everyone's listening to each other and playing the right thing so that they all support each other. And that's just rule number one, I think, for all recording. Everybody should do that. So anyway, that was Mau Mau.
We should also point out that single is on Bomp Records.
Bomp, yeah. The Sparks manager, when we were in England, can't remember his name. Doesn't say anybody else's name on there, does it?
No.
Exhibit J. His name started with a J. It was his label, or his name. But for some reason I can't think of it. Doesn't really. Oh, I know. He
JJ
was in,
label.
Huh?
The label says JJ. J-J.
All right. Oh, if I could remember these names. John's Children. He was John of John's Children.
Oh.
and John's Children had some great songs that we were fans of. Anyway, John was Sparks' manager over there in England, hired by the record label to just keep us in line. And then when we came back here, he moved back to LA too. And his first project I think he put together was the Dickies, which was fairly sick. Oh yeah, that's a good story. He and I went over to A&M Records and presented the Dickies album to A&M to say, these guys are great. And I didn't know much about labels, but John pogoed while he played the album. And so then everybody at A&M knew this must be the thing they had to sign because John was able to pogo to it.
Oh, wow. Nice.
John Hewlett, that's his name, Hewlett.
Nice.
So the Sparks,
I forget where that brought us to, how I got there. But
so when the Sparks did their pitch, they had a big box of a bunch of art goodies.
Who did?
The Sparks. When you said Sparks did their.
Oh yeah.
And then the Dickies, their pitch was a pogo. And
yeah, that's right. This is how you get signed by major labels.
No,
kids.
John from John's Children pogoed to get the Dickies their deal with A&M. This is incredible.
That's how it works. Yeah.
Hey, I know we're running out of time. I want to talk about the Runaways, Queens of Noise. Now, you got to say it. There's always rumors that the Runaways didn't play on these records.
They played everything. Yeah.
Okay.
That was my attraction to them. These girls who could play guitar and not just play guitar, not just a few chords. They were really good, And so that album was them. There were issues in the band, they're kind of the metal contingent, and I won't say that Cherie was the non-metal contingent, but when Kim Fowley would write a song for her, it would turn out to be kind of one of these sappier songs on the record, and there was no hope for it, and no matter who was backing it up, it was that kind of a song. And so she was more the middle of the road style songs, and then Joan and who's my favorite guitar player?
Lita Ford.
And Lita. I wish I could play like Lita. She was great. They would support all of these things, and their drummer was great too. They were just a good band. That's all there was to it. And so my concept was, all right, 60s girls group, because that's what I really loved, being from the 60s, with guitar, and sometimes it really worked and sometimes it didn't. And in hindsight, when they went on to be in Japan, just a straight metal band, it was like, oh, Earle, you had all the wrong idea for these girls. But I still loved the idea. I love playing with fire, with harmonies and guitar, and still was it not Still in Hollywood, but the something about Hollywood, the girl who was I can't remember, but the point is a heart-wrenching guitar solo and story, you know, with rock feeling, that just terrific. I loved them. To me, that was a girl group with guitars, and that portion of the album, that approach from the album was great. And I still, you know, I'd stand behind the whole idea still, because I like listening to those types of songs. So sorry I wasn't a metal guy.
So after that, you and Kim Fowley take on Helen Reddy.
Yeah, crazy, huh?
Yeah, no, I mean Helen Reddy, who was a big star at the time.
Yeah. Kim said that she just wanted street cred, and apparently we had it. Don't ask me how, but it was a lot of fun. We were able to use studio musicians for everything, so any idea that we come up with, no matter how crazy it was, it would always work because the musicians were so great, you know, and laid it down, put it out the door. It was a lot of fun. She could sing anything you had to get her to sing. She was really good. And of course, all the backup musicians, which Kim was instrumental in. You know, if we were going to do a Zydeco song, he would get all the famous Zydeco guys from Louisiana to play on it, you know, and just piece of cake, just recorded. It was fun doing that album.
Wow.
So can I just share this quote I found?
What?
Because as we're talking, Earle, one of the things that impresses me a lot, especially talking with you today, is your constant reiteration of, I'm a musician in a band. I'm a musician that listens as I'm producing. And so when people highlight your musicianship outside of the studio, I think it's very interesting. But this took it to a different level. And now when you were talking about the Kensington Market and the jackets, I found this quote on a Sparks fan site.
Oh, yeah.
So this is the quote. During live gigs, Earle Mankey would wear glitter suits and attempted to be everyone's favorite English poof guitar player.
There you are. It's my job. Just doing my job.
Funny thing was, Earle Mankey's suits were always a size too small. Blonde hair would hang in an exaggerated Rod Stewart shag. Earle Mankey knew every move in the book. The Mark Bolan pout, the Pete Townsend leap, the calculated pretty squish, and the aggressive Jeff Beck posturing, but with a Gibson SG Standard instead of a Fender Stratocaster.
That's the only place I fell down, I think.
But the Gibson, was that your
yeah, that was actually choice? We got a signing bonus, and so we were able to buy amps and the Gibson for me and my brother as before we went to England. And then we went to England. We bought all Marshalls, and then we went to England, and everybody laughed at us because why would you buy Marshalls? That's just, you know, that's for the punters, you know. That's and in fact we did a gig with the Kinks, and the Kinks also used high watts, and so they talked us into getting high watts, and so we bought high watts while we were over there and used high watts for the rest of our time. So I still have that high watt. They're great amps, by the way. They might be better than Marshalls. It could be, depending on your sound you're looking for.
All right. Well, this isn't a Paisley Underground, but I did want to bring up one of my favorite records that you've worked on, and ask a little bit about this, because I was wondering what it would be in this, like in the studio working with Joe Nolte.
So that was
Gin and Innuendos. I love this CD.
Yeah.
Do you recall working on that?
I do. I'm embarrassed because I'm trying to think of his name. Who's the main guy in the last?
Joe Nolte.
Joe. Okay, Joe. Yeah, Joe and his family. I've worked with various members of his band and his family at all different times. And but that time that Joe came in, it was just Joe. Well, I shouldn't say that. It was just Joe laying down tracks, and then later the family would come in. Oh, yeah. So okay, so I'll do the whole number on this. So Joe would come back from whatever job that he hated, that he'd been working during the day, and he'd come and he'd take off his clothes and he'd put on his skater shorts, and he'd, you know, he'd be dressed up for the session, and then we'd go through, and he was, he was totally in control. He, he knew what he wanted to do, and the guitar parts and everything, and we laid down all that we could. And then when he would invite the rest of the band in, namely, there would be his brother and Christy, and I can't remember all the members, but I know it was in my studio room here, and they filled up most of the room while they basically argued with each other. And it was very, very not evil like fighting, but this is family stuff, just arguing about what it should be and so on. They were all nice about it, but they typically would have arguments with Joe and maybe between them as well. And so and then they would sing the backup and things and so on that they had come to do. And roughly speaking, that's all I remember. And and then Joe and I would mix it. And for all I know, that album you held up has things that we did, and maybe things that Joe did somewhere else. I don't, I'm just the guy that the band shows up, we do our stuff, and they leave. And if they get a record deal or who knows what's going to happen, I never know. And that's how much I know about that album.
Just for clarification, when you said that Joe Nolte came in and was just recording the guitar parts, were you recording to a click track? Oh
no, I'm undoubtedly forgetting a whole lot. It was a band.
Okay.
It was a band, and I remember one of the guys in his band. I hope I have the right organization, because there were different groupings of Nolte types.
Yes.
But one of I think it was the bass player, was Earle Mankey. Same last name as me. I've never met anyone with my same last name. And he was there. But yeah, they did the basic tracks too. But that's usually a frantic thing that would go by. In those days, it was in the house. The drums would set up in the kitchen, and the guys would set up in the living room and the bathroom and everything, and they'd all be separated. And usually it would go down all in one day, and then they'd leave, and I'd never see him again. So my main memory of the album was Joe.
Okay. So
Joe in the background sessions.
So all of your recordings are there at your house. I've seen it listed as Earle's Psychedelic Shack, Earle's Psychedelic Kitchen, all kinds of different names. But did you ever think to get like a building, rent a building, buy a building, or just?
I tried that early on, and it didn't work. Names. Anyway, there were some guys that I was going to have a studio with in the Valley. They were, let's see, I think they played in Soft Machine, and they played with Todd and the drummer and a bass player. And their dad was a comedian on TV.
Wow.
Hunt and Tony Sales.
Yeah, Soupy Sales' sons.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I almost had a studio in the Valley with the Sales brothers, and they took me out to lunch at the coffee shop, and we went and we checked the place out, and then a jet airplane flew over the top of the studio, and I said, this isn't gonna work. And so that was kind of the end of that bit. It might have worked, but it never did. It just set it up in my house, and it was way better. I'd always recorded at home my whole life anyway, so more comfy there.
So recording at home is kind of commonplace nowadays, but when you started, I think it had to have been something that's been very unique.
Yeah, that was something that kept us from getting record deals. People would say, you can't record a record in your home. We're going to have to re-record it in the studio. And that happened a lot of times. And in my estimation, it would never be as good in the studio because it was the second time you've done it. But there's a thing, I don't know if you've been in bands, you discuss everything you're doing. Well, unless you're a certain sort of band where you just toss it out. But, you spend a lot of time in a band working things out. And finally, after doing it for 3 weeks and it didn't sound very good, then one day it's finally working and we must have found the key, and then that's the version you've got, and if you're recording at home, you can keep on until you get to that point, and I just, I've recorded a lot of albums at outside studios that were supported by record labels, again, because a record label would never want to use the one that you do at home. And I always always disappointed going to the big studios because, you know, you break a string, or, you know, something on the tape recorder doesn't work, or you name it, 100,000 things that can happen during the stretch of a session. And you go and you say, there's this problem, and no, this is just what we do. You're going to have to stick within these bounds that we have, you know, and you can only do this, and we don't have that. If you needed I don't know, if you needed a garbage can lid to pound on, we don't have one of those. But you know, it's home recording. It's the thing that makes it fun, and you can't do that at the big studios. Everything at the big studio tends to have a certain lack of ambience and a certain really present clarity, and that's all you can get. Beyond that, you could be anywhere, you know. So anyway, I like recording at home better.
Nice. And we like your home recordings.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, many of them. So
Yeah,
Ronnie, I'm surprised you didn't mention this one.
Well, no, I was about to say, and Jeff, I'm going to one up you holding up these records, and I got to disconnect for a second to do this.
Okay. All right. So Ronnie is famous for doing show and tell, Earle. So
oh my gosh. Wow. I wish I had one. No, I don't want to say I wish I had one of those, because somebody will probably send me one.
Yes, I like it so. Yeah, I like it so much. I have it framed. Yeah, I have it framed. It's one of my favorite records, Earle.
That's great. I love that.
And you produced and engineered that record.
Oh,
so
Mike, check out those CDs back there.
Yeah.
There?
Yes.
Okay, that's since the CD era. Those are albums that I've done, and you can't see them, but there's an LP rack down there that are LPs that I've done down there. So if I want to look back on history, I usually go and dig out a CD or an LP. So
nice.
That's my reward.
And you don't have to, if this is uncomfortable, you don't have to talk about it, Earle, but you had a different drummer on that record, correct?
Oh yeah. Well, it's more that they don't want to talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah. So the original drummer who got the band together and talked to me and made it all happen. I mean, he was kind of my connection to the band. And even every band I work with, I try to find out what they like and who their favorite people are on recordings and how they recorded it and what they'd like their recording to sound like. Well, he was my guy for 2020, and the other two 2020 guys, they're terrific musicians. They can really sing, they can really play, but they didn't have the artistic vision that he had. He really directed us down a certain path. That unfortunately, when it came time to record the album, the other two guys, and this is to their credit, they weren't happy with his drumming. He wasn't the greatest drummer in the world. Although I hate to say it, I probably would have let it go, because I usually take bands for what they are. Either they have a good drummer or they don't.
Yeah.
And anyway, they weren't happy. We recorded, I think, before we did the real album, we did 4 songs, I think, at Capitol Records, and that original drummer played on them, and I thought they worked out great. I figured we can do this for a whole rest of the album. But when we went to do the body of the album, then the other 2 guys weren't happy, and so they had a friend from back in Oklahoma, I think he was, and he was a great drummer. And
Phil Seymour.
Phil
Seymour.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and they were right. I mean, I'm sure glad he was our drummer. But that was how that happened. If there was bad vibes, they didn't show it to me, so I don't know. And then, one day he was there and one day he wasn't. But I've certainly heard in the past that he wasn't happy about not being in the band after that. So that's as much as I know, personally speaking.
Yeah. He didn't play on the next, so he didn't. I like how people don't realize sometimes the best musician in the band or the worst musician in the band might be the guy who makes things go, like you were saying.
That's it. So many times it's, and you can find in every band, there's somebody who is the mover. And from my point of view, if I stay close to the mover, he'll be having bands for the next 20 years. He'll come up with some new organization, that wants to record, hopefully with me. And you have to have those guys in the band. the 3 o'clock. Well, I shouldn't say it's just about 3 o'clock, but all of these bands that are kind of the Paisley type bands, they're real music fans, and, I'm a music fan, but I came up through the 50s and 60s and early 70s as a, turn on the radio and hear what you're, like what you're hearing. And I didn't take it from a record collector standpoint. I just liked the bands, or I didn't. And if they were guitar bands, I liked them usually. That's about all it took. But the guys in Paisley Underground and most of these people we're talking about who are the leader of the band, they're fans. They know like you guys, you know all of these records, and who played on them and so on. Well, if you were in a band, that would be the kind of band you would have. There's no doubt about it. And it takes somebody like that to get enough of momentum in a band to make it worth listening to. Anyway, that's just a long way of saying I didn't partake of that, but I required that. We did a thing with 3 o'clock. You guys saw it a couple of weeks ago, where they were talking about, who made these songs happen, especially 16 Tambourines, because that's the one that I had the most input on. And it definitely wasn't genius on my part. Again, I'm like a guy in a band who knows how to record and who wants to try every trick he knows on the recording end of it. But they were such fans that they always knew what the coolest beats were and what the riffs were. And when I might get on their case about, oh, this could never work, but then they come up with something that works, and they were just really creative. And I'm not trying to puff them up here. I was lucky that they were all creative and just had an artistic bent to them, and were such music fans, such fans of bands, probably most of which I didn't even know. So it was lucky on my part, So anyway, that's it for 3 o'clock. I think they're really great.
So I have one, since you brought up the 3 o'clock, I mean, it had to be done, Earle. So one song I wanted to talk about. A Day in Erotica, off of 16 Tambourines. It's very psychedelic, a lot of different things going on. Do you remember recording that?
Yeah.
That's
I mean, most of it would be, with anything that I do, it's like, oh, how can I make this more from the 60s? Although I didn't think of it that way, because to me, the 60s was how artistic, how creative can you be? Can you come up with a weird sound like phasing that no one's ever done before? Of course, after the 60s went by, that wouldn't be a new thing, but that was always the way that I was looking at it and trying to make it sound. And so we got the tracks down to pretty much do that. But Michael, who wrote the words and the melodies and so on, had two approaches. And I think everybody's heard this, but he had two approaches, and we couldn't really be satisfied with either one of them. It didn't seem to go over the edge like a lot of the other things did in the song. And so then just one time we had them both on together. And they say that I thought of it, and I say that they thought of it. So I think everybody in the room just said, whoa, that's cool, let's do that. That's how I'm going to lay it down. But it was pretty neat. It made what might have been an interesting vocal and another interesting vocal into something that, whoa, what is this? So I thought it worked pretty well.
very well. Yeah, that song always stood out for me. One last question for me, and then if you guys have anything. So you've talked a little bit about your production and how you approach almost like being a member of the band, and you like the band recording live as much as possible, or together, I should say.
Yeah.
How do you describe like your production style other than that?
I've been told by, I remember one specific guy and who said, well, we had to go with a different producer for this next round because you were just like a good buddy or an uncle or somebody in the band, who would just help us get along and get this down right. We need a producer who says, do this. You're not going to get a hit record unless you have these backgrounds and and that sort of stuff. I've never been comfortable with telling anybody who was in a band what their band was. I mean, they knew coming into me what their band was, and for me to tell them they have to make these changes to be successful, like that's just crazy, So that's pretty much what, if you were a guitar player in a band and you didn't feel like it was your band and you were the leader, that's probably what the attitude you'd have, I mean, you've been in a band, right, Jeff? So
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
What you're mostly just happy that you're in a room with guys playing and nobody's fighting. And when they start fighting, then the band breaks up. So that's where I stand. But as long as we don't fight, it's okay.
Fair enough.
Good rule. Well, Earle, we're going to let you go, but we'll close with this. 2 weeks ago, you were back on stage for one song at the
Yeah, shocking.
Nuggets thing. How did
Danny
that
Benair
feel?
got me to go on stage. Danny Benair, let's give it to Danny. And
Yes.
I've been in, I loved Pandemic because I had nothing coming and all I had to do was play with my toys. Best 2 years of my life. And then Danny got me out of the house, to get on stage, and that took me to that to the Wild Honey thing, and that took me to you guys, So thanks to Danny.
Yes.
But I'm not going to do anything else. Good point. Everybody has asked me, "Oh, are you out of retirement?" No, no, I'm retired. Don't want to do any bands anymore.
Yeah.
So much as I love you, I'm not going to do it.
So you are officially retired.
I am officially retired. Yeah.
Well, Soraya, with that,
We'll see. We'll see, Earle.
Anything I do, it'll be at home on my own. That's and
Fair
probably no one will ever hear it. So there you go.
Well, we
I
can
got-
always ask.
I got space in my record collection here, so
One slot.
Earle, I know this was it took something to get you to join us, and it's been a discussion that Soraya and I have been wanting to have for 4 years now.
Yes.
But we really do appreciate it, and great stories, Earle. Really great stories. Yeah, and I know Ronnie's going to be thinking about the underwear that belonged to Queen.
No doubt.
That was a great one. Yeah.
Yeah, well, your show's been great. I've heard all of the shows, and every time I heard anything from Paisley Underground, I said, "Boy, I'm glad I'm not on there because I don't remember any of that." So
yeah. Well, you did. Don't be so hard on yourself, Earle. You were fantastic here. We couldn't get you to quiet down.
That is true, isn't it?
In all honesty, we appreciate it, Earle, and enjoy your retirement, and I hope it comes to an end and somebody can talk you into it. But
oh yeah,
don't hold your breath.
Enjoy.
Me and Danny will get him out again.
We really appreciate it, and thank you for sharing stories.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
All right. We hope to talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
See you soon.
Yo.
Ronnie, what do you think
Jeff,
of Earle Mankey? And thank you for
Soraya.
making it happen, because we know that he was apprehensive about coming on when we talked to him, and then you talked to him again.
Thank you.
Which we just touched on, and how funny is that? Earle thought he wasn't going to remember anything, be interesting, like literally we wound him up and let him go, right? Like it was fantastic.
Yeah.
Earle is my new favorite. No offense to you two. Earle's my new favorite person. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that was blowing me away, he's telling these stories, and I think the first name drop was Queen, and but it's his style of production. Even him as a musician, he really downplays his contributions, but when you look at all that he's done, it's so impressive, and it's such a variety of artists. And for someone to say, I just walk in, I want people to just play together. And he really downplays his style as a producer, but we've got the proof, right? And then the whole 2020 album, that could not have been easy to manage, as you're seeing two band members really, the word he used was, sorry, I was taking notes, that they just weren't happy. And I'm thinking, as a producer, that's got to be super hard to manage that, still get something out, and then boom, these two guys are already bringing in somebody else. And it's a whole thing.
Yeah, no, you got to manage the personalities too, which he illustrated in several of the stories there. The last, every band has their dynamics like that, right? Like, and sometimes the opinions are strong, and it's part of that would be part of his job. But yeah, you said it, Soraya, we barely scratched the surface on what he's produced. If you look at his credits, we barely got after 1990 is when he did all that stuff in his house, and like it's a huge list where the Lazy Cowgirls and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, so Possum Dixon and Jupiter Effect and Permanent Green Light
And come on, he engineered Elvis.
yeah, no,
I mean,
Elvis. Look, he brought up
Johnny
Elton John,
Millville.
but we didn't get to talk about Blue Moves. Like he engineered
Yeah,
a lot of Blue Moves. It's just it's astounding.
Yeah.
see, and this is why we need to invite him back for episodes 2 and 3 and 4, or he can invite us to the Psychedelic Shack.
Yes, that's a good idea. Field trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah, we're not averse to that.
He worked on Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me, which means he was there when Elton got mad and made sang that line weird that stayed in the song. The Don't Discard Me part.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Elton was mad when he did that. Yeah, that's lore. Yeah. What a guy.
Insane.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me in on this, you guys.
No. Thank you. Thank you for calming his fears that all would be well and it done with love, warmth, and just absolute respect. Because Jeff and I are so focused on this one tiny scene, but Earl's imprint is on so many.
Yeah.
And you cannot deny, he's a legend in the business. His imprint is on so many bands and so many albums. It's just whew.
Yep. And so
Thank
just
you,
so
Ronnie
nice.
Barnett.
Of course. No. At the end of the night, I just said, look, I'm gonna be in on this interview. Don't worry. He's like, and again, he said I'm not gonna remember. I'm like, don't worry. We'll handle this.
Okay, but now we seriously need help, because I want to know, first of all, hats off to Earle Mankey, because he's a UCLA alum like me. Boom, boom. But I want to know, who was this heavy metal band that Sparks played a show with in Houston?
Yes, I want to know too.
We need some Sparks fans who know the history. Please let us know. I want to know who that band was.
I'm going to try to figure it out.
Their fans were absolute jackasses.
Because I'm going to try to figure it out, because that's my hometown, as you two know, and I'm pretty certain that happened at a place called Liberty Hall.
I was going to say, I wish we knew somebody who liked Sparks and that was from Houston.
Yep, that's me. Yeah. So I don't know. We'll I'll get on the internet and see what we can find. But
nice.
Yeah, great story, and in this, everyone's seen the Sparks documentary, but that story about in the documentary is one of my favorite parts, because somebody says that Ron was very Ron was very concerned, and then Ron looks in the camera and goes, "Was I?"
Yeah.
So
blood trickling down.
And now we need to find this Cigarettes album.
No, all the things he's mentioning, there should be an Earle Mankey box set of unreleased recordings from the 70s. There's tons of, just knowing him and knowing he's an engineer and then how he kind of goes about his business, there's tons of stuff sitting there.
Yep.
Yeah. Needs to happen.
Ronnie, I don't know. Pick up the Earle Mankey VIP phone.
Yeah.
Say, hey Earl, we'd love to come and hear a bunch of stuff that no one else has ever heard. But seriously, this Cigarettes thing, I'm thinking of that lineup, and so it's Earle Mankey, his brother Jim, Danny Wilde, and then
Ian
Ainsworth. Yeah.
Ian Ainsworth. I want to hear that.
Yeah. Right after the Quick. Yeah.
Man. Too many good stories. And man, he's your favorite person. I think he's become our favorite person too. No offense, Ronnie.
It's all good. I get it.
Up at the top. My God, this is too good.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you for
having. And show us that poster again. That beautiful. The beautiful piece of 2020 artwork, because that's artwork.
Hang on, I got to disconnect, or else I'll screw this up.
No, don't screw it up.
So I
wanted to see it one more time.
When Ronnie pulls out his big,
bloody hell, look at that That is fabulous. Ooh, child.
Ronnie, I pulled out my little one and then you upstaged me and pulled out your big one. That was,
Wait, he's not hearing you.
well, still.
And, yeah, I can't hear
Now
you.
you can say it.
Now I can
Now
hear.
you can say it. Go for it, Jeff.
All I said is I pulled out my little one and you had to upstage me and pull out your big one.
Always, Jeff.
Ain't it always like
Always. Yeah. And not to blow my own horn.
that? Okay.
Is that proper to say after?
Yes.
There's a reissue of the two 2020 albums that came out on CD on Real Gone about 10 years ago.
Yes.
Right.
And not only did our friend Steve Schnee write the liner notes, but I got a credit for providing memorabilia. And in addition to some buttons and flyers I had, which I have some here
Oh,
handy. I let them open a sealed copy of the second album, Lookout, because they didn't have a good copy to use for their artwork.
wow.
So I'm like, okay, you can open my sealed copy and
Wow.
use it.
Oh,
So I had a small part of that. And
nice.
yeah.
Ronnie.
Yeah.
You're a good man.
and I'm friends of sorts with Steve and Ron, and I hope they're not mad about us getting a little recording. Talk about the band there. So
Yeah. Poor Mike. Poor Mike.
yeah, no, Mike. Yeah, but I'm friends of sorts with him too, and I'm yeah, he deserves more credit. And, yeah. So
2020 is a great band.
Yes.
one of my favorite records. Yep.
All right, Ronnie. Well, until we do this again, we appreciate it. And
No, thanks you. Yeah, thanks you guys.
Would not have happened without you. Thank you so much.
That was a blast. So
Oh my God. Great.
all right.
all right.
We'll see you
Now-
soon.
Okay. Be
care.
nice. All
We
right.
will.
Yes.
All right. That went.
I am blown away. You know, one of the things I wanted to bring up, but I just didn't, because Earl's words were enough. He said a couple of things at this 3:00 panel about Baroque Hoedown here in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago.
Mhm.
And it just goes back to his style of production. Someone mentioned a song where Mickey Mariano was just kind of going off, and he said, most of the sounds are Mickey. My job was to say, yeah, that's great. And I'm thinking, and then when he told the story of being told, yeah, you're more like a buddy, and we needed someone to come down hard. But then you look at his credits and you say, okay, well, then there's something still to his production style where he's able to get very good work out of the artists that he works with.
Yeah. Yeah. Some artists don't need that push, right?
Yeah.
Need that direction, some push. So it's like, what chemistry, works for different artists, might not work for others. So
Right.
I can see how some artists might need that person that's gonna
Sure.
push the band to a different level because they're not there.
Right.
But yeah. But we really appreciate all of his work. And following up on our next episode, Soraya, the plan, and it all comes back to this album, to the 3:00. So we went to the panel. If you haven't listened to it yet, the most recent episode by our friends from the JFJ Conspiracy podcast, they cover this record too. So that gave us an idea because we love this record, Soraya. So we reached out to them and we asked them if we could meet up with them and kind of share an episode, do a split episode. So we'll be meeting up with JFJ Conspiracy, and this was a trigger point. So the albums the songs on here that aren't originals by the 3:00 kind of prompted what we're going to do with the JFJ Conspiracy. So there'll be a part 1 on their feed and a part 2 on our feed, but we'll be joining them to talk about where some of these songs originated from that are not original. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, today was great, Jeff. And I don't want it to end, but thank you once again to the great Ronnie Barnett, guest host extraordinaire, and to the amazing Earle Mankey
And
for
great
his time.
Yep.
All right, Jeff. I hate it. I hate that we have to stop, but mi gente a grullar.
Grew on, Paisley people.
It's my
have
fault.
given us
Yeah.
gold.
Oh.
You have given us gold, Earl. You have no idea. I'm just
Yep.
smiling because these stories are fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah. These two have dissected the Paisley Underground, with an inch of
Yeah,
its
yeah.
life. So don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
As I said, I've listened to all of those. That's the reason I decided to come on, because it was
So
embarrassing.
can I